today we're talking about the future of ELT publishing from your perspective, specifically your perspective. So let's start with that, shall we? Do you want to just tell us a bit about you? And I think just to give the game away, you're a publisher. You're a publisher for Macmillan Education. So can you firstly just tell us about yourself, and then just tell us a bit more about what is the role of a publisher within a publisher?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as Teresa said a moment ago, I've been at Macmillan for a long time. I'm originally from Latin America. I've spent most of my life in the US, but I've also lived in Mexico for a long time and in other places. As a publisher in my role, I look after, there are several publishers at Macmillan, so I'm not the only one. I look after the American English material in primary and pre-primary, but also global methodologies. So I look after, things, trends, and the cutting edge of education. And it's my responsibility to make sure that the materials we create for pre-primary and primary, specifically in my portfolio, that they're published, taking into account exactly what teachers need. So we go to schools, we visit teachers, we talk to administrators, to teachers, we watch lessons when there's no pandemic, obviously. And it's my responsibility to make sure that those books and digital materials are published on time, and that they are what the teachers and students need. And as Teresa was hinting at, the things that, it's really exciting right now to be doing this work, because we're at a time in education when we realize there are a lot of needs for things like inclusion, sustainability. So these are things that are really motivating and making my job really exciting right now.
Amazing. We've had a very interesting comment in the chat already, Mariela. I've got to say it. Are you the Daenerys of Macmillan Education? Do you know? You don't know Game of Thrones? You haven't seen Game? Okay, she's the main character in Game of Thrones. She's awesome.
I'm so sorry. I don't know the reference.
I think it's quite the compliment. Maybe not the final season, but apart from the final season, it's a massive compliment.
Okay, I will definitely look it up now.
do. Okay, so as we said in the abstract that described this session, Mariela, we mentioned that you're going to be talking a bit about DEI, GCE, lots of acronyms. So DEI, GCE, sustainability in ELT.
Correct.
So should we just zoom in on those a little bit and just define what those acronyms actually mean in themselves, and also perhaps go into a little bit about what they mean within the context of ELT?
Sure, absolutely. So
Thanks.
Yes, DEI is something that we're very much aware of now, and it refers to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity usually refers to the representation of people from different social groups and identities. People usually think about race as when you think about diversity, or at least here in the US, that's the first thing that sometimes comes to mind. But it includes all kinds of diversity. So gender identity, sexual identity, neurodiversity, ability, physical ability, disability, differences in ages, socioeconomic status. So anything, that is part of human identity.
That's diversity.
That's diversity.
Okay.
Equity refers to fairness in opportunities, treatment, and access. So it usually means, traditionally, historically, not all of these groups have had fair access to opportunities. So equity usually means acknowledging structural inequities, so that people that have been marginalized, people that have been left outside of the opportunities, have equal access and possibilities as the non-marginalized groups. And then the last one, inclusion, refers to bringing all those voices in so that people are able to participate. So not just have access to, but are respected and fully welcomed and embraced.
Okay.
So that would be DEI, which is something, and there are different ways, different acronyms for it as well, but that's a one that's used a lot.
Okay, great. So that's DEI. GCE, so global citizenship education.
So global citizenship education is something we're talking about a lot at Macmillan right now. And it's the idea of educating people of all ages, regardless of, very young preschoolers all the way to adult, to have the knowledge, attitudes, and skills to live in a harmonious way on the planet, live a harmonious way with each other and with the environment. So it's educating people to live in this interconnected world that we can't deny, regardless of where we are. And then the last thing you mentioned was sustainability, and that hones in on that aspect of living in a way in which we ensure that we sustain life on the planet for all of the future generations. And you know, English happens to be, you were asking in ELT why I talk about these things. English happens to be the perfect environment for it, because usually people study English because they want to communicate with people outside their immediate community. Not always, but usually. So if you learn, for example, in global citizenship education, you learn, and in DEI, you learn about your own unconscious biases, the things that you think, you know, are the way the world works, but maybe you're not taking into account others' perspectives. With building these skills, then you learn to go beyond just communicating in words, but actually understanding people who are different from you. So so that's how they intersect with English language teaching.
Excellent. Amazing, Mariela. So what we're talking about today is those concepts within the course books that a lot of the teachers here, I'm sure, are using, and that teachers around the world use to teach English as a foreign language or as a second language. So my next question so we're going to be talking about the future of ELT in this talk. But I want to just start by just going back a little bit and just try and find the origin of this, and where, if there was a specific change, if there was this moment, this sort of eureka moment or not. Maybe it's just sort of happened over time. But I mean, from my perspective, I was teaching, I would say I started teaching about 12 years ago. And I was probably using course books at that time that were produced, you know, in the 10 years or so, maybe even 20 years previous to that. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, the materials that I used back then, and comparing them to at least the direction of where things are going now, I didn't find them particularly representative of quite a few communities around the world. Certainly looking at them now, it looks like there have been pretty decent steps in the right direction. You know, one that keeps coming to mind is the yurts in Mongolia spread. We used to have a double page, and it's this sort of culture spread where it's trying to broaden your knowledge of the world, and it shows you this very cliche, very sort of I hate to use the word, but ignorant sort of view on what another culture looks like. So what's your experience of that time? Did you experience something similar? And what's changed in the last sort of 20 years from the perspective of, from your perspective, working in publishing?
Okay. That's a lot, but let's take it step by step. So okay. Your experience was very similar to mine. When I was teaching, I also used books that were very different from what we're doing today and what we hope to continue to evolve to do. When I first started in editorial, I started noticing things, little things, like just that the default, my first editorial role was a field editor. So it was my job to check that the content that was being created, that it was what the market needed. And my main market at that time, I was based in Mexico. Okay. So I would look at content and notice just that the default was always Eurocentric, right? So everything from the characters that were created, the photos that were used, the topics that were chosen, it was always from the perspective of a Eurocentric perspective that put European Western culture as, the norm, the default. And it was easier for me to notice these things, I think, because, I'm from Venezuela, my dad is from Chile, I've lived in different places. So there was a little nagging thing that I'd always felt like, well, yeah, that's what's normal in certain parts of the world, but not the rest. Mm-hmm. There was also the prevalence of the white male as the aspirational element. So okay. I would, even if it was a lot of the editorial world is very female, and often authors, there are many female authors, but still some of the, manuscripts that we would receive I remember one about, Richard Branson being the topic of a special project page, and just wondering, gosh, he's featured a lot in pop culture. Maybe we should be featuring other people that represent other sides of society. So I think that we, at this point, are at a place where that has shifted. It hasn't shifted as much as it can, and I think it's something that we are evolving to shift further. But at this point, one of the things that we're doing is we're not, I always like to ask the question, whose perspective is missing? So we're not starting Eurocentric, or when we look through content, if it has, gravitated towards being predominantly Eurocentric, we try to bring it back and include other perspectives. So This is just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
And I suppose
we're at the beginning of a journey.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose it's not just the journey of the publisher, it's a societal journey, isn't it? It's a journey of everybody that needs to sort of slowly adapt the content that they're using and the language and the way that they're teaching to mirror that, to reflect that too. And you can't, I suppose, jump the gun on that.
Absolutely.
So should we just zoom in on those three areas then a little bit and just talk about what's happening to them, what's happened in more recent times, and where do you think they're going to go from there? So global citizenship education first, GCE. I'll say that a bit slower, sorry, I'm rushing. I always rush that one. Global citizenship education. So when did you first see that being something that was taught in a classroom? Or is that the first place that you saw it in the ELT world?
So my sort of pathway to global citizenship was actually visiting classrooms about 6 or 7 years ago in pre-pandemic times, and noticing that there were schools in different parts of the world. So this particular instance that I'm thinking about, I visited Latin America, and I also visited the Middle East, and I noticed a pattern where there were schools that were looking to give their students the skills to do well in an interconnected world. So some of them lucky enough to expect their students to either study abroad at the university level or later on in grad school. Mm-hmm. And the skills that they were promising and that they were trying to embed in the classes had to do with accessing information and being able to communicate well with English speakers to access education. So that led me to do research and it led me to global citizenship education, which builds on that, because that is, if you think about it, an economic aspect of our interconnected world. The access to higher education, or the access to opportunities, whether they're educational or work opportunities that go beyond where you are personally located. But then on top of that, once I started researching global citizenship education, I realized there's a deeper and very satisfying layer to it, which is developing the attitude, the knowledge, and the skills to actually do well and have a positive impact. Mm-hmm. So that sparked something for me and my colleagues, and we started working on that specifically at Macmillan.
So it was a very conscious decision. That yes. Looks like you're one of the front runners, you're a pioneer of this. And so there was a conscious decision made to include more GCE in courses. How did that go? Yes, exactly. We published 2 years ago, we published a course that I believe was a pioneer in including global citizenship education. And since then, we've implemented, we're starting to implement that approach in all of our courses, but in a more formalized way. So we've created working groups at Macmillan, and there's a global citizenship education working group, and it's full of passionate people who believe in this. And we've worked with experts outside of Macmillan. We've created a global citizenship education framework that allows us to ensure that our GCE outcomes are embedded in our content. Right.
And it's important to note, Will, that this wasn't only something that we noticed was important, but that we saw there's a push from outside organizations like the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. That's the organization that creates the PISA exam that secondary school students take. So the OECD in 2018 started including a global competence exam. So, you know, they're trying to test how are countries educating students around the world to live in a globally connected world. So, and then obviously the other one that I think people are very much aware of is UNESCO. You know, in 2015, countries signed on to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals created by UNESCO, in order to try to alleviate some of the inequalities, live in a more peaceful world. Well, the SDGs include a Sustainable Development Goal specifically about education, SDG 4, that calls for global citizenship education. So really it was a confluence of factors of us noticing this is a need of students and teachers in schools, this is something schools want to do, and then there are organizations that are giving it a big push around the world.
Yeah, so I mean, Michael's just flagged up that, yeah, thanks for reminding me, Michael. So we had Harry Waters here yesterday, and he did a whole session on SDGs and how to refer to them in your classes and, you know, spread the love, as it were. Can I just ask the audience a quick question, Mariela? I'm interested.
Of course.
So Mariela just mentioned, guys, I don't know if you, everybody, if you just heard that she was talking about a course that we released a couple of years ago that was sort of the flagship for this new direction. Does anyone happen to know the name of that course? I would like to ask if anyone knows the name of that course. We will tell you, Grazia. I want to see if anyone knows what the name of the course is, if they recognise it by the description. Gateway is a good guess, Renata. Gateway certainly in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gateway to the World, the new one, definitely is heading a lot more in that direction.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to type it in there. Global Stage.
Right. It's a primary course, and that was the first one that we published that embedded global citizenship education. But you'll be seeing a lot more of that in all of our courses moving forward.
Great. Okay, so it's Global Stage, Diana. So I typed it in. I typed it at the top. Global Stage. So let's move on a little bit into the future. So you've just sort of taken us on this lovely journey on how this all sort of formed with you, and then how that sort of populated the publishing. So so we've got the teachers watching now. How is this going to impact them? What's going to change for them in terms of the course books that they're using? What's happening?
So hopefully they'll start to notice that all of these things, global citizenship, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sustainability, are embedded in the lessons that they're teaching when they're using our course books. It'll mean that the activities in the books that have to do with these issues are actually developing the issues. For example, we've always taught the environment, but now if you take a specific topic, for example, like marine animals and their environment, we might lead students to discuss local animals and connections between the humans, the animals, and the environment, and then to engage with what they could do locally that would have an impact on any one of those elements. So that's just to give you an abstract example. I think that I shared with you some lessons. I don't know if you want to share.
Yeah, let me just share them here for you.
Okay, so right now we're looking at a preschool lesson, and this is a lesson that builds students' awareness of stereotypes. So if you want to, this is, you know, for 4 or 5-year-olds, but really you can do it at any level. If you'd like to keep scrolling, Will. So you'll see here that they're looking at their own, their immediate family, the things that surround them. If you can keep going.
Yeah, I need to come out of it because we've got this one this is for the, we've we've got 3 separate worksheets. So that's pre-primary, isn't it?
Right. So that leads up, that leads up to the stereotypes one. So that pre-primary one really was an awareness of the self, right? Starting with the variety in the classroom of how all of the children are not the same. They're different, but they all have something, you know, they all can relate. And then if you look at the primary one, I believe that one is the one, right? That's the one that talks about, that gets it. So here, because we always have to move in, you know, developmentally appropriate. Now we've got a little bit older students, and we can start to talk about what is a stereotype. So we start with, in this lesson, we start with things that students can relate to very easily, such as toys and activities that sometimes society expects them to choose and to use. So if you want to keep going, then they actually, once they've thought about all of these things that they normally have in their lives, they have to think about what is a stereotype exactly, what is the definition of a stereotype, and we lead them through that. And then we take it a little bit beyond that by showing real life examples of people that don't fit the typical parameters of stereotypes. Yeah. And then students get a chance to think about themselves. And if you'd like to move to the secondary one, here we take it into something that maybe people in that previous, okay, here you go. So here you'll notice that we're bringing in not a Eurocentric point of view. So, this is I believe this person is based in Mexico, family Mayan. And so we start to talk about identity. And if you move on a little bit, here we look at identifying different parts of people's identities, their social identities, and how that leads to having more or less privilege. And if you keep going, you'll see, ageism, which is one of those social identities that we have. People make a lot of assumptions about people based on their age. So this is an example of how we open up that topic and create some awareness in our students. You keep going, I believe it goes, there you go. And then this is the, taking action part, where people identify things in that they feel are unfair or unjust, and that they would like to take action on. So hopefully that gives you an example of, the types of materials we're working on and that people can look for if they're interested.
Thanks a lot, Mariela. I've just shared the links to all those. They're actually available now if you want to get hold of that. Anybody who's watching wants to actually use those materials, they're free. They're on One Stop English now. They're not on the paid subscription of One Stop English. You can just get them for free. So the links I've just put in the chat box. Let me put them again. Very, very kind people are saying thank you, but I just wanted to push the links at the bottom there. Okay, so thanks very much, Mariela. So let's move on from GCE, shall we? So that's Global Citizenship Education. We haven't got too long actually, so I'm going to sort of just push through this a little bit, if that's all right, because I don't want to overrun. So looking at DEI. So how has DEI changed? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So from concept stage of a course book, how were assets and content and media and personalities and representations selected before? And how has that changed recently when you're trying to obviously maintain a diverse and representative set of materials?
So, like I said, it's an evolution. From the concept of a course book all the way to delivering the published material and to the live material, we have to take into account these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's happening now is that we have across the board at Macmillan, in fact, our parent company, Springer Nature, has made a big effort for people to be trained and understand these concepts, right? So I think across the board at Macmillan, we are all much more aware. So anybody working on course books materials is much more aware of we've had trainings We've developed trainings as well to become more aware of our unconscious biases, of the stereotypes that we might rely on and use easily in our day-to-day without realizing it. So essentially, we're all learning. We've made a concerted effort to learn. We've developed guidelines to support ourselves when we're developing content, to make sure that we're checking that we're doing a good job. But of course, I think as we learn, we'll make mistakes, and it's a conversation. One of the things that we need to do, and it's not easy to do from one day to the next, is involve more people from the bottom up in terms of authors, in terms of editors, widen the lens so that it's not always the same types of people who are creating content. So we're aware of all of this and on the journey.
Great. Yeah, as are we all, Mariela. Okay, so looking at sustainability then. So I remember when I was a teacher again that we did have these spreads sometimes, these sort of green world spreads of some kind in a course book. But that was, I'd say, a bit of a token spread. Certainly in the past, it was once a series, twice, 3 times a series at best. I would say you'd get a spread that actually looks at the environment, and it was usually looking at climate change. To be honest, it was just looking at climate change. I don't remember seeing anything else about sustainability. So can I ask how you've gone about ensuring that the content approach to sustainability is now becoming more relevant and diverse and less cliche and less niche to how it was before?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think we've taken the lead from the UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goals. So starting from SDGs, working not only on SDG 4 quality education, but also all of the SDGs. We start there with the documents that UNESCO makes available, and we ensure we've got our own guidelines and criteria for how to ensure that the topics that are embedded actually go beyond the just creating awareness, but actually thinking about issues and the impact that individuals and communities can have on these issues.
Positive and negative.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Mariela. Well, I think we're coming to the end. Thanks very much for your time, Sarah. I do realise how busy you are, and it was it was real pleasure to have you at the festival. So thanks very much. I have got one more question for you though. Sorry. So I've just got one more question I'd like to ask Mariela, if that's all right. Okay. It's a personal one. I'm just going to end on a personal note, I think, because you are. I mean, someone said the De Niro's of Macmillan Education. I don't know if that's De Niro's turns out to be a bad guy, but she's excellent throughout the series. But you are. I really
have to go watch this.
You've got to. But you are you're a driving force in Macmillan. Everybody knows Mariela Hill in Macmillan, and you've been here for so long, and you're the publisher of pre-primary and primary American English courses, and that is massive. That's a huge responsibility, and you've made a massive change to the way that Macmillan Education does things, not just in your segments, across the board. So can I just ask, what drives you? What's driven you? Because you're obviously driving the bus. You're one of the drivers of the bus, and I'm just wondering, what is driving you? What's the fuel?
Okay, first I just want to say that a lot of people drive all of this, and while it's true that I'm deeply passionate about it and invested in it and doing all kinds of things that work for it, it's only possible because there are a lot of other people doing it and as passionate as I am as well. But what drives me is a sense of justice. What drives me is understanding that, something that I think I've mentioned before to you, Will, is that when I was a teenager and I was growing up and understanding how humans had an impact on the environment, I remember very distinctly learning about the ozone layer and about how when you use an aerosol, it would send these chemicals into the environment that would open up the ozone and let the harmful sun rays in and all of that. And I remember thinking, well, if I won't use this product and that will have a positive impact, and if everybody around me stopped using this product, then we would make a difference. And thinking, well, how could anybody possibly know about this and use these products? So that sense of not only justice, but if once you know something, you have to do something about it. Otherwise, how can you live with yourself? That's just how I am. So that, I think, is what drives me. And as I've matured as a professional and been exposed, I've been so lucky to be exposed to so many things. I think I've realized that I have the same feeling about social justice. Once you understand that people aren't as lucky as you in many ways, and once you understand how you yourself have been marginalized, you can't just sit around and say, oh, okay, but I count myself lucky. No, I've got to do something. So.
Absolutely. Well, it's spilling out of our courses now, Mariela. So watch this space, guys. For, I mean, now it's already started happening, but obviously in the years to come, are the courses that Mariela produces with all of that passion. Is they're out now, and they're going to continue to come out for years to come. So look out for them. Thanks again, Mariela, very much.